Now that's how you take care of a front end of a back-to-back situation for the Warriors. They have another game coming up tomorrow against the Spurs, and the Warriors absolutely took care of the Suns, took care of business in the kind of way that they needed to, with the standings the way it is. And again, a back-to-back situation coming up. You want to take care of business if you can against a depleted team like the Suns. And the Warriors had a 31-point lead to start the second half of this game, and they were pretty much able to retain like a 30-plus lead for a chunk of the second half. And it's really funny because I'm watching how this fourth quarter shakes out with the bench unit filed in, the third stringers playing and all this kind of stuff. And Steve Kerr right now has a lineup, and he always tends to do this in blowout games. He has a lineup of Pat Spencer, Jackson Rowe, Kevin Knox, Braxton Key, and Trayce Jackson-Davis. And actually, to start off, they had Kuminga in there initially. But with Kuminga in there to begin the fourth quarter, the Warriors were at -5. Steve Kerr took Kuminga out of the equation, and the Warriors started playing winning basketball the rest of the way. And that's an awful lot of size for the Warriors out there. And unfortunately for Braxton Key, not a good showing. He's like 0 for 4 in the 4 minutes that he's gotten to play so far. But with GP2 and Quinton Post not available for this game, guess who got an opportunity to play again? That would be Gui Santos. And of course, if you're me, more interestingly, Trayce Jackson-Davis finally got a chance to play. So there's a bunch of things to get to here in terms of lineup combinations, which ones were thriving, which ones needed a little work, how did Trayce look in some of these lineups that Steve was trying out. We'll get to the bottom of all of that in this video. But before we get to all of it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and that like button so that this video gets out to all the Warriors fans out there. Okay, now let's get straight to it. As you know, I was highly agitated by the fact that Gui Santos lost all of his rotational minutes in the previous game with the return of GP2. And I want to make this clear. The Warriors need both Gui Santos and GP2 in rotation. These are indispensable players for the playoff run that is to come for this team. Both of those guys are really important because they're really good at the things that they do coming off the bench. They know their roles and they play it to perfection, at least from the standpoint and the context of what the Warriors have on their roster. But to start this game off, Steph Curry got hot immediately from the jump. He had 13 points in that first quarter. And like I said in the last video when the Warriors lost to the Rockets, it's really important that the Warriors make sure that Steph Curry gets into rhythm at some point in that first quarter, because we all know that they have a tendency to just let him do a bunch of cardio for the first 6 minutes at least, and then in the final 3 minutes or so is when he starts to get it going as the bench unit starts to file in. Yes, Steph Curry started out with 7 points in the first 6 minutes of the game, which is not as common as you would like if you're the Warriors. And then the first two guys to come off the bench were Jonathan Kuminga and Buddy Hield. So then you have Steph Curry, Hield, Moody, JK, and Draymond on the floor. And I think segments like that are the segments that Steve Kerr will want to avoid once they get into the playoffs. First and foremost, you're putting Jonathan Kuminga at that power forward position again, and nobody wants to see that at this point. Jonathan Kuminga is confirmed not a power forward. And for Steve to make the rotations like that, where Jimmy Butler comes out of the game and Kuminga is the first guy that comes in, well, that can potentially create a scenario where the Warriors are at a disadvantage for that segment of the game. Now, a few possessions later, Steve would end up bringing in Gui Santos for Moses Moody, and that makes the Warriors a fundamentally different unit with that 3 forward lineup of Jonathan Kuminga, Gui Santos, and Draymond, as opposed to Moses Moody, Jonathan Kuminga, and Draymond. You see the completely different dynamic right there? Moses Moody is more of a perimeter player, a guy who's out there trying to play POA. He's not the guy who's going to crash the glass, bump and fight against the bigger players in the league. Now, it didn't hurt against a depleted Suns team who also lacked size. But I am talking about these types of rotations in a real setting, in a serious game, in a playoff setting. But yes, Gui Santos was once again all over the place, creating all kinds of second chance opportunities for his team. He had 4 offensive rebounds in this game, and he had 6 rebounds at halftime that led the Warriors in rebounding. Gui Santos has some kind of a magnet for the ball, because wherever the loose ball is, he's there. Like, this guy has super anticipatory powers or something, because wherever the ball goes, he finds a way to be there. And because he's such a fundamentally sound player, he doesn't try to do something wild with the ball once he does get it. He's always looking for the right play, and he's always looking for the right player to get the ball to. And when you have connective players like that on the floor, is something that the stat sheet will never ever be able to tell you. No kind of stat sheet can give you the fundamental stuff that the players provide on the basketball court. You have to use stats to your advantage as you create a narrative of what you're seeing on the floor. And there's a lot of stats, and then there's a lot of advanced stats that you can use to ultimately supplement your point. You never ever use just stats to define a player or identify a situation just based on especially just regular stats. Right? So for example, when Gui Santos is able to retrieve an offensive rebound and then he surveys the floor and immediately finds the best available open player, whether that's Podziemski, whether that's Steph Curry. And he does it in such a timely manner, and that timing is gigantic for a team trying to reach a certain level. The timing has to be crisp and sharp. If that timing is like a second off, suddenly the things that could happen end up not happening because the defense, all it needs is a split second to recover back to where they need to be. And the better the competition, the better the defense is going to be. So your offensive execution has to be that much sharper. And man, we saw some really good combinations in that first half, especially in that second quarter. I saw a combination where Gui Santos was at power forward and Kevon Looney was at center, actually to close the second quarter. It was Loon, Gui Santos, Jimmy Butler at the three. Love it. Love the size of it. Love the fundamentals of it. Love the rebounding ability of it. Love the rotational ability of it. Love the hustle nature of a combination like that next to the two-guard lineup of Steph Curry and Brandin Podziemski. And you know me, I'm always going to advocate for more size for the Warriors. 3 forward combinations is going to be better for the Warriors than 3 guard combinations like 95% of the time. The only time you make exceptions for when it comes to 3 guard lineups is when you have to include GP2 in there and say he's next to like Steph Curry or something, and then they may add Buddy Hield in there, and then you're running that 3 guard lineup. And then I thought I was dreaming. I saw a combination of Trayce Jackson-Davis and Gui Santos on the floor at the same time. And little do people know, Gui Santos and Trayce Jackson, when paired together, are fantastic next to each other. And that's no surprise. They've had time together in the G League, and they're similar types of players. If Gui Santos is going to look really good next to Kevon Looney, you better bet that he's going to look really good next to Trayce Jackson-Davis as well. But yes, Trayce got extended run in the second quarter because Quinton Post was missing, so he absorbed all those Quinton Post minutes, and he was playing well enough where Steve was like, okay, you just played these minutes in that Jimmy Butler-centric lineup, and you did a pretty good job. Before changes came about, the Warriors were able to go on a 7-0 run because they were able to be more powerful from a defensive standpoint. The Warriors were able to get stop after stop after stop, and they got out in transition and started getting easy buckets. And that is how you dominate teams and create separation more than whatever it is that you end up doing in the half-court offense. I know people look at the half-court stuff. Oh, where's the spacing and all that? But if you put out a unit and it is shutting down the other team, then the other team has no hope. And if you're dominating from a defensive standpoint, believe you me, you're going to start scoring. And that's what they started to do. And Trayce was able to get 7 points in 7 minutes of play in that second quarter. So he finishes the minutes with the Jimmy Butler-centric lineup, and then guys start taking a seat from that unit, and then Steph Curry and Gui Santos file into the game. And then the Warriors are able to remain powerful from a defensive standpoint. And then they're getting out in transition. And Steph Curry is able to find Trayce Jackson-Davis not once, but twice. And the alley-oop lob that brings a different level of intensity and energy to the crowd is something that we haven't really seen in a while with Trayce out of the equation. And we got a glimpse of it immediately. And what we saw in that second quarter with Trayce Jackson-Davis in rotation is a glimpse of the potential that I have been talking about, that the Warriors could reach another level with this guy in rotation for their defense for a long time now. And I'm glad that we got at least one game where we got to see a little bit of it. I don't know what the status of GP2 and Quinton Post will be for tomorrow's game, but these are the perfect kinds of games where the Warriors should get a look at somebody like Trayce Jackson-Davis heading into the playoffs. And you know, when the night started, actually, the Warriors were actually sitting in the 8th seed. The Grizzlies were able to get a win tonight, so they ended up going to the 5th spot. And this is the thing about losing that game against the Rockets, is that the Warriors put themselves in this position. But the good news is that they utterly took care of business in this one. The Timberwolves ended up losing to the Bucks on the road, and the Clippers are likely to beat the Spurs tonight. So the Warriors should be sitting in the 6th seed when all said and done. And that's more good news for the Warriors that they end up facing the Spurs, who are also playing in tonight's game. So they're also playing a back-to-back like the Warriors. And because the Warriors were so good in that first half, the second half of the game was pretty much over. The Warriors just had to maintain play in that third and the fourth, and that's exactly what they ended up doing. Steph Curry only had to play 26 minutes in this one. And talk about a quick turnaround after a 3-point game against the Rockets. He puts up 25 points, 9 rebounds, and 6 assists in just 26 minutes of play. He looked very active, very involved, and very spry in this one. He even hit one of those really rare, tough, fadeaway mid-range shots. This guy Gillespie on the Suns was all over Steph, and Steph was like, you know what? I'm going to take you to school. Eat this fadeaway right here in your face. I'm not even going to watch it go in because I know it's going in. And Brandin Podziemski, oh my goodness, that shot is on automatic. I don't know if Steph Curry has been giving him some advice to tweak his shot or something, but my God, his shooting has been incredible over the last couple of weeks. Once again, 22 points in just 22 minutes of play, 4 of 6 from the 3-point line. As you guys know, I've been talking about the non-viability of that starting unit, the small starting lineup where both Podz and Moody are on the floor at the same time. And for those of you guys that fight for that lineup, and for those of you guys that talk about, oh, how that lineup is virtually undefeated and all these things, I have some bad news for you. I want you to take a look at this stat right here. It basically takes a look at all the lineups that Jimmy Butler are involved in, minus the ones that Kuminga are involved in. Jimmy Butler and Kuminga together still are a negative. They're like a -8. But the top 6 lineups that you see right here, those are all positives. And guess what? Despite the fact that they have a net rating of 10 in that starting lineup, it's also one of the most ineffective, and as a matter of fact, the most ineffective out of all the units that you see here. There's 6 different units here, courtesy of the Sage on Twitter, and that small starting lineup has the worst net rating out of all the combinations that they've tried with Jimmy Butler. And you know, at some point, that stat was like a +18, +19, something like this. So that means they have been dropping drastically. Like I've said in previous videos, it quite reminds me of the small lineup that the Warriors tried to start at the middle part of last season. And it's just becoming more and more clear that the Warriors are going to have to choose a bigger lineup when they get into the playoffs. And here's the thing. Moody does some things that are really good. Podz does some things that are really good. If you have to choose between the two of them to determine who's going to be the starting shooting guard, well, I feel like we have seen a test run of both of them in the equation, both of them getting equal opportunities to show what they can do, and I feel like Podz has won that battle. I think Podz has shown that he has more overall in his bag and more consistency than Moody does. And so if the Warriors were to go smaller come playoffs, it's going to be Podz who's going to end up being the starter over Moody. Although that's not a guaranteed thing, it depends on matchups as well. There's going to be certain matchups where if the other team has a more powerful perimeter-oriented player, it may be better to use Moody as a POA guy because Podz isn't necessarily that. And Jimmy Butler and Draymond both only had to play 20 minutes apiece. Jimmy Butler didn't have to play at all in the fourth quarter. And again, the stat sheet is not going to show you anything special, especially in 20 minutes of play. But I just can't appreciate enough the level of connectivity that Jimmy Butler has. Just so fundamentally sound. The guy has almost no weaknesses. And this is super rare for a guy who's been a franchise caliber player, but has all the fundamentals down and understands what it takes to win basketball games. And that is the only thing that Jimmy Butler cares about. And I absolutely love and appreciate that like you wouldn't believe. And after the previous game against the Rockets, Jimmy Butler came out in the post-game conference talking about, man, I've never seen a player that gets fouled as much as Steph Curry does without getting called for those fouls. And honestly, that was so refreshing. You don't see Draymond, you don't see Steve Kerr, you don't see Klay Thompson, you don't see all these teammates of Steph Curry that actually stands up and speaks out on behalf of him and protecting him and defending him and speaking the truth on what is actually happening. Jimmy Butler gives no Fs. And that's the kind of beautiful, powerful, loyal teammate that Steph Curry always deserved by his side. I absolutely love it. But yeah, remember in that Rockets game, I got upset when Moses Moody decided to take a 3-point shot when he had Steph Curry wide open next to him in that first quarter. And you wonder how much the coaching staff gets on players about plays like that. But in tonight's game against the Suns, there actually was a little bit of a soundbite where Buddy Hield ended up doing the exact same thing. He's open on the wing, Steph Curry is wide open in the corner, and Buddy Hield decides to take the shot himself. It's the play where the Warriors were able to get an offensive rebound, got the ball back out to Buddy Hield, and he ended up getting another three-point shot opportunity, and he ended up hitting it, so it didn't hurt the Warriors. But from a fundamental standpoint, and when these things happen in the playoffs, you have to be aware of what's going on the floor, and you have to play at the highest level possible. And those are the kinds of plays where you fail to see the greatest offensive weapon you've ever seen in your life is wide open in the corner. That's the guy that you have to find. It doesn't matter what your name is. And I do quite like the fact that Steve Kerr pointed out to Buddy Hield, and he's like, you know, you're quite the shooter yourself, but take a look at who's wide open right next to you. Paraphrasing, but that's about what he said to Buddy Hield, and the mics caught it, and I think that's a really good teaching moment for Steve Kerr to say to Buddy Hield. I also appreciate that Kerr stuck with Trayce Jackson-Davis in that second quarter, both with the Butler unit and the Steph Curry unit. I'm telling you, man, his size, his defensive ability, his defensive versatility, his switch ability will take the Warriors to the next level from a defensive standpoint. Yeah, so ultimately, Trayce ended up getting a bunch of garbage time in that fourth quarter as well. He ends his night with 13 points and 8 rebounds in 19 minutes of play. And he really needs to get into the swing of things and regather his rhythm and confidence as they start heading into the playoffs. And I would say for Kuminga, he was once again a mixed bag of good and bad. There's just a bunch of possessions where he's just forcing it down the lane, and too often times it ends up being a miss or a turnover. And he just plays a style that the Warriors prefer not to play. That's the issue. And the other issue is that when he does these things, he's often on the floor at the same time as Steph Curry or Jimmy Butler. And to me, there's just no world where it makes sense to go to Kuminga over one of those guys instead to create something for the rest of the team. It would simply be ideal if Kuminga can just fit into what they're doing and take advantage of the opportunities when opportunities present themselves for Kuminga to take advantage of the space created by the offense that they're running. There's very little room for this team to stop everything and just get the ball to Kuminga and just let it be Kuminga time and just gamble on that. There are one too many great players on this team for them to be doing that at this juncture of the season. And it's inefficient and ineffective basketball. Kuminga operates best for this team when he's fitting in and taking advantage of his scoring opportunities in open space and especially in transition where he's the most powerful. Probably one of the best transition players on this team when it comes to finishing in the open floor. But yes, from an all-around standpoint, you can see that everybody was a positive across the board. Warriors beat the Suns by 38 points, nearly 40-point victory. That is awesome. Now the starters can take it easy and prepare themselves to kick ass tomorrow night against the Spurs. And the Clippers are about to take care of business against the Spurs. So if my math is correct, I'm wondering if they end up in either the 6th seed or the 5th seed. We'll see what that looks like at the end of the night. Currently, the Warriors are back into that 5th seed because they have the tiebreaker against the Grizzlies. And there's currently a 4-way tie where 4 teams have the exact same record. My goodness, it is an absolutely insane finish to this season. We'll see how it all shakes out, but as long as the Warriors continue to win out and take care of business, ultimately they control their own destiny, so we'll see how it goes. Anyway, that's all I got for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. As always, like I stated, the Warriors will play again tomorrow night, so we will reconvene soon enough. Until next time.